Prologue. The brain is our most precious and fragile organ. Our potential to love, solve difficult problems, appreciate a joke, or navigate the complexities of human interactions completely depends on a healthy brain. Dr. Joseph N. Serpy, DC, BCM. I haven't taken a science class in 30 years, so I don't understand much of what I hear in the podcasts I subscribe to. But last week, a guy was talking about brain mapping, so I searched the web for functional neurology and ADHD. Soon after, Facebook showed me an ad for the Neuro Plus Institute in Naperville, Illinois. As I understand it, the brain map, a quantitative electroencephalogram, or QEEG, shows how well your brain is functioning by analyzing brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, and delta. A forgetful woman who can't seem to get her chores done might show a lower frequency of beta waves. Maybe she'll have higher theta, which fosters intuition and creativity. The doctor, any type, who is certified in neurofeedback, uses a brain map to determine treatment. The Facebook ad convinces me that this doctor knows what he's doing as well as any of them do. He's got experience, degrees, certifications, lots of letters following his name. He's got a pleasant face and positive, although probably hand-picked reviews, literally dozens upon dozens of real patients sharing their stories of positive change and hope. The office is in a familiar shopping area, 2 suburbs closer to Chicago. I decide to give brain mapping a try. On the phone, I learn I need to schedule my appointment the day before Thanksgiving. One of the many perks of teaching in a community college is that I get that whole week off. But my 3 kids will be home on break. Do I want to schedule time away from them? I have an idea. In a group text with Bruce and our kids, I write, I just signed myself up for a brain map. Who wants to join me? I include a link to the NeuroPlus website. Discover brain-focused wellness. Like cars, brains need a tune-up. Ethan, my oldest, responds immediately from Texas. Okay, in. He's working towards a doctorate in physical therapy from Baylor University. Ethan was diagnosed with ADHD in 3rd grade. I knew he'd be curious. Anyway. Annie, the youngest, is a sophomore nursing major at the University of Iowa. Sure, she replies. When Annie was in high school, she convinced me to take her through the ADHD screening process at our local clinic. I'd resisted because I thought she was perfect already, but when she said wraparound, she had trouble focusing while driving, I relented. She was diagnosed junior year. Ben, also in Iowa, a senior studying speech and hearing science, says, yes, he too wanted to be tested as a teen, but I never bought him in. Lack of attention was not his problem. A bit of anxiety, maybe, low self-esteem, not ADHD. And I was sure that if he entered the clinic, he'd leave with a prescription. I'd never know anyone to go through that screening process and come out clean. Bruce is the last to chime in. He writes, brain nap? In the kitchen, I ask him to be serious. What is this thing, he says. A brain map. I sit at the island watching him load the dishwasher. These days we have a system. I place my dirty dishes on the countertop in the precise manner that he has requested, plates cleared and stacked, silverware corralled inside a cup or glass, nothing in the sink. If I follow these instructions, he will do all the work of loading and unloading every day. He's 11 years older than I am, in his sixth year of retirement after a long career as a chemical engineer. He enjoys being home, mowing the lawn, managing our finances, caring for our 2 dogs. When the kids are home, Bruce does their dishes and laundry. He has always been better at this stuff than I am. Yes, a brain map, I say. They cover your head with a nylon cap that holds sensors over certain parts of your brain. They squeeze in some gel and measure electrical activity, brain waves. He continues loading the bowls. Why would we want to do that? I first heard the term. Okay. He continues loading the bowls. Why would we want to do that? I first heard the term neurofeedback several years ago. Another mother worked as a technician at a neuroclinic similar, I think, to this one, and she mentioned a few times that her kids had benefited from treatment, improved grades and confidence. I was polite, but I thought she was a kook. The doctors at our ADHD clinic had never said anything about neurofeedback. It could be interesting to see what's really going on in there, I say to Bruce, just for fun. I pull up the website and read to him. We don't use drugs or surgery. Instead, our clinical approach is scientific, evidence-based, method focused to a self-style combination alternative and Western medicines. Bruce knows I'm interested in functional medicine. He knows I've lost faith in traditional doctors. How much is it? He also knows that functional medicine is often not covered by health insurance. In one of my podcasts, Mark Hyman, a physician at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, said it takes 17 years for the latest science to become mainstream. I discovered these podcasts 5 years ago when I was 100 pounds overweight, pre-diabetic, taking meds for high blood pressure and ADHD. I found the trend of biofeed hacking, which according to another podcast guru, Dave Asprey, is the art and science of changing the environment around you and inside you so you have more control over your own biology. The idea of taming the chaos of my particular body appealed to me. They've got a special deal going, I tell Bruce. For $80 you get the scan and consultation where they compare your results to a normal brain. Pause. Of course, if they see problems, the doctor offers a treatment plan which would cost money. He places the silverware in the basket, always with business ends up. Whenever I attempt to help, he critiques my less methodical ways, handing me an excuse to stay away. What kind of treatment? Neurofeedback, I say. They use a computer to train your brain, which apparently can fix ADHD, addiction, anxiety, depression, memory problems. They say the changes are permanent. I've gone too far, too fast. No thanks, he says. I've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, so it'll be just me and the kids going for brain maps. $80 each. Is it worth it to scratch a weird pseudo-scientific itch? Spending loads of money on a whim is not good for my mental health. I just wonder what the scan will reveal. I continue reading from the NeuroPlus website. We listen to your medical history and your past struggles. Then the doctor will step back and try to determine what is slightly out of focus. I make the appointments. Chapter 1, Ghosts. Last year, my daughter's soccer team played a game on the grounds of the Tinley Park Mental Health Center in the Chicago suburb where I grew up. The girls and their parents couldn't get over how spooky the place was. The hospital had been closed for years. Its deserted government-style buildings, 5 or 6 of them, surrounded by empty parking lots with weeds growing through the cracks, sat on a busy corner of Harlem and 183rd, across from the bowling alley and a Speedway gas station. This hospital is where my parents worked, first Dad and later Mum. In fact, when my brother was a toddler, the 3 of them lived on these grounds. A 1966 snapshot shows them standing in front of their apartment, Mum looking like an alien version of herself, all thin and stylish in a powder blue suit with a fancy blue hat. Dad's wearing his normal polyester work clothes, holding Mike's hand, Mike in a little Mr. Tweed jacket. I'm guessing it's winter because they all look cold and everything behind them is dead. From the sidelines of Annie's soccer game, I recognized Dad's office building, 4 stories of grey brick, a grid of windows. The structure behind it was the round building. That's what they called it, but I can't remember the name of Dad's building. In 4th grade, a kid in my class heard that my parents both worked at the mental hospital and thought that was funny. Are you retarded? He asked. Did they find you in the loony bin and bring you home? For a time I wondered if this could be true. Dad's building, I can't believe I forgot its name, was where he showed the secretaries my good report card in 7th grade and where they made a fuss over me. Dad's building was where he had his heart attack 2 hours before he died. It's where 3 years later Mum brought Mike when he was 19 and schizophrenic. The doctors, Dad's friends, gave Mike some pills and sent him home. Dad's building is where I came after the hospital was mostly closed down, all but the mental health court, to ask the judge that Mike be committed to a psych ward in the next town. He was almost 40 by then. Now Mike is in his 50s, living in a nursing home, and Mom died a few years ago of a brain tumor. When a soccer mum asks why I'm so quiet, sitting there on the lawn of the Tinley Park Mental Health Centre watching my daughter play, I told her it's the ghosts. The place is full of ghosts. It was in first grade that I began to think there was something wrong with my brain. Talking to friends at the back of the room, I vaguely registered Miss Osterello's by the door. "Class, I need your attention up here. Whose coat is this?" We quieted, but I knew I hadn't brought a coat. Her question didn't concern me, so I continued chatting. "This belongs to someone," she pressed. "Whose is it?" Nobody answered. Finally she gave up, and I followed the line out the door. After recess I spotted the navy jacket hanging alone on the rack and realized it was mine. I'd left the house that morning without it, but on the way to the bus stop I decided I was chilly and went back in for it. My brain had stuck on the first choice, erasing the second. Miss Osterello didn't ask me why I'd not claimed the coat earlier, and I was too meek to explain. With her towering over me, I felt her disappointment, her bewilderment. There might have been a shake of her head at my willful disobedience. What I remember for sure is a long, frightening walk to the principal's office. Earlier that year, I'd neglected to close the cap of my glue bottle, which happened to be 6 times larger than anyone else's, and the white stickiness oozed all through Sophie Larson's supplies in our shared cubby. Stephanie, a perfectly coiffured blonde in dresses and bows, hadn't been a fan of mine before that day, and after my glue ruined her pink glitter pencils, she was even less friendly. It was the beginning of a great divide, me and them, the ones who had their shit together. There was a time early on when Mom, Dad, Mike and I sat in the kitchen for breakfast every morning and for dinner every night at a round pedestal table with a shiny brown finish and 4 chairs to match. Dad's place at the table depended on the meal. In the mornings he would come down from his bedroom and choose the spot closest to the stairs. At night he'd come up from the basement and sit closest to those stairs on the other side of the table. I don't know if he thought out his seating arrangements this way, but it was a regular pattern and the rest of us worked around it. At one of the few family meals I remember, Dad sat to my right at the table, Mum across from me, Mike to my left. Mum had made steak, Dad's favourite, with a fork and a butter knife. I don't think any of us had steak knives. I clawed at the meat on my plate and separated a too big piece that I put in my mouth anyway, gnashing it for a long time, trying to reduce it enough to swallow, eventually giving up and spitting it out, while Mum and Dad talked, their cigarette smoke swirling up into the white globe of light hanging above us. Mum had recently decorated the kitchen with a farm-themed wallpaper, lots of browns and yellows, some cute cows, a cartoony farmer and his cartoony wife. There was a new refrigerator, which Dad called the icebox, and on the sideboard, which is what Dad called the countertop, a new cutting board with a picture of a red pepper and the words "Chilly today, hot tamale." What strikes me about this brief memory is the routine of it, the normalcy. I sat in the chair by the window, my back to our front yard, where 3 oaks lined 174th Street, a quiet artery of Tinley Park, 30 miles southwest of Chicago. Across the street was Martha's house. When Mom, Dad, Mike and I had moved in a few years earlier, Martha and I were both 3 years old, and our brothers, Mike and Buddy, went to kindergarten together. Sometimes I forget my family started out so calm and conventional. I forgot that in the early springs of kindergarten and first grade, Mum would cut down brown stems of lacy white catkins from the pussy willow bush behind our garage. She wrapped the bottom tips in wet paper towel and covered them in foil so I could present the pretty bouquet to my teacher. By 5th grade, I decided that some teachers thought pussy willows were weird, although now I see their reaction probably had nothing to do with the flowers. I cut the stems myself and stood there waiting for Miss C's smile. I was chubby, maybe in my stained yellow Fonzie t-shirt and fake denim jeans, always forgetting a book, leaving permission slips in my desk, doing the wrong homework. I rarely brushed my teeth and most nights didn't take a bath. Miss C wrinkled her nose and asked, "Did you get into your lunch already?" In junior high, I left my clarinet sitting on the sidewalk at the bus stop so many times that the Baldellis, an older couple who lived on that corner, knew exactly which number to call. Once or twice they drove the clarinet to my school so I could use it that day. I don't remember being embarrassed. In fact, it felt nice to be taken care of. This was in the 70s, and my parents were busy with other things. They both had careers. Dad is a psychologist, Mum is a nurse. After work, they went to the bowling alley and sat with friends in the bar, which was closed off from the bright lanes. They didn't bowl. Years later, Mum told me she thought she had to be there night after night to keep her marriage alive. Dad loved those nights, joking and drinking with his regular gang from work. His friends called him Denny the Irishman because he'd borrow his parents' brogue to tell jokes. Dad's closest pal was Jerry the big Swede, a social worker who drove Dad to work in the mornings. They often stopped at McDonald's for breakfast, and I remember Dad imitating Jerry's reaction, "Jesus H. Christ," when Jerry took a bite of Egg McMuffin and yolk exploded onto his tie. Dad could hardly talk, he was laughing so hard. At his funeral, several people told me how funny he was. To me, he didn't seem funny at all. But once, I overheard Dad telling Mum about 2 psychiatrists he worked with who argued a lot. Dad called them a paradox, and Mum laughed. A pair of ducks. Paradox. Years later, I understood. Mum often brought me to the bowling alley for a dinner of frozen pizza, which Eileen, the bartender, heated in the toaster oven, and a couple of glasses of Coke. Though Dad urged me to try Diet Coke, I'd sit in the dark corner booth of the bar area, sometimes with my brother, tapping a foot to Teddy Pendergrass or Jimmy Buffett on the jukebox. After pizza, I'd beg my parents for quarters to play in the game room. I learned to drive on the racetrack simulation with a real steering wheel and a gas pedal. It wasn't a bad life. But I would rather have been like my friends whose mothers made dinner and whose dads fixed cars in the driveway. My dad didn't even drive a car. Mum did all the driving because Dad was legally blind. He was born in a Chicago hospital during the Great Depression, the 6th child, all boys. His mother's labor had stalled, so doctors used metal forceps. I picture big salad tongs to pull his head through the birth canal. They squeezed in the wrong place and damaged both of Dad's eyes. One had to be removed, the other maintained partial sight. Mom's Minnesota birth in 1940 was even more traumatic. 6 days before her arrival, her father had walked into their barn and shot himself in the head. She was an only child, raised by her quiet, sad mother and maternal grandparents. Maybe my family was doomed from the start. Chapter 2. $1 a pound. On the one hand, there are benefits to a childhood unencumbered by supervision. When I grew tired of my 6th grade paper route, the novelty of earning my own money no longer enough to get me out of bed at 5 a.m., and I dumped the bundles of Tribunes in the swamp by the playground, my parents didn't get involved. I'm not sure they knew I had a paper route. I felt sorry for my friends whose folks were on them to clean the garage, set the table, do their homework, rake the leaves. These are the same kids who were afraid of getting in trouble for things like crossing Harlem Avenue. Once in 2nd grade, one of the neighborhood moms spotted me and Martha running across this busy street on our way back from the grocery store for a candy bar or some little toy. Mrs. Holch called our parents. Martha got yelled at. I never heard a word about it. Although there were no discussions of cause and effect, no consequences or criticism, no routine chores, no conversations about grades and after-school activities, nobody asking what I wanted to be when I grew up. There was a freedom and independence that was good for me. I wasn't molded into somebody else's vision of what I should be, so I followed my instinct and interests, knowing that my hobbies were self-driven. I saw myself as unique for enjoying a good book, for being the only one in my group of junior high friends who played racquetball or joined the writers' club. I played in the band. Some kids were afraid to step out alone. I did it all the time. And because nobody at home was criticizing me for every move I made, I didn't learn to criticize myself. My inner voice as a child, was neutral, objective. I had confidence in my abilities and I didn't focus on faults. The only exception was when it came to my weight. I recall only 3 conversations between just my father and me. In one, he taught me how to iron a pair of slacks, lining up the seams to get a crease. In another, he explained how he could tell coins apart without seeing them. Quarters and dimes have ridges, nickels and pennies don't. Finally, in 7th grade, the year before he died, he told me he'd pay me $1 for every pound I lost. The previous year, when I was 12, I remember a dinner out with my parents at Jardine's, where he'd go sometimes after the bowling alley, where I ate cheeseburgers and fries, sitting next to my mom in a booth across from Dad, while they chatted over martinis. Afterwards, in the parking lot, Dad used a muffled tone to convince Mom of something he didn't want me to hear. It was a school night in the winter, and we pulled up at Ben Franklin, the downtown dime store. Go with your mom, Dad said. He waited in the car. I followed Mum through fluorescent aisles of batteries and candy bars until she stopped at the small rack of white bras. No way! No way! Instead of disappearing, poof, which is what I wanted to do, I kept walking to the exit while she picked out a bra and brought it to the man at the register. Dad came from a family of all boys. He was legally blind, yet he was the one who knew what I needed. I wonder how well did he see me? Had his friends at the bowling alley, maybe Eileen, the smoky-voiced bartender who delivered my pizza and cokes, mentioned my chubby body? Did he know that I went to sleep at night longing to wake up 30 pounds lighter so the boys would like me as much as they liked Martha and Dina? Did he know that since 3rd grade I'd hated choosing clothes from the Pretty Plus section of the Sears catalogue? With his $1 a pound offer, he was trying to help me. I understand that now, but what I heard was what I already knew. Fat was an ugly thing to be. Starting in junior high, I would regularly go all day without food because nobody made lunches or told me to make my own. I'd come home after school to an empty house, and since I'd had no breakfast, be so hungry that if a pound of ground beef sat in the fridge, I'd pull off a piece of raw meat and eat it. I liked the taste. Then I'd remove the crust from a slice of white bread, shake the white softness into a hard ball, and pop it into my mouth. I'd roll another piece of bread and another. If we had bologna and American cheese, I'd spread a glob of mayonnaise on 2 more slices and make a sandwich, which I'd eat in the dark basement while watching reruns of Gilligan's Island or The Love Boat. During a commercial, I'd run up and make another sandwich. If friends were ever talking about what they ate after school, I'd mention the one sandwich, nothing else. One sandwich was normal. When I had money to spend, if I'd found a few dollars around the house or had discreetly pulled a $5 bill out of my mother's purse, I'd ride my bike the mile to McDonald's for a cheeseburger, large fries, and a medium Coke. I sensed that it was wrong to eat outside of a normal mealtime, even though my family didn't have a mealtime, and it was weird to go to McDonald's by myself without my friends. The outing was my secret. Once around 7th grade, I was somehow eating a cheeseburger as I rode my bike home when I noticed my brother on his bike coming towards me. In a panic, I ditched the burger, throwing it into the grass of someone's yard. I saw that, Mike jeered. You're sneaking food now. Oh, man, he laughed and pulled his brake lever so he could stand there on the sidewalk and talk. so he could embarrass me more. But I kept riding. Mike didn't sneak food. He played baseball on the high school team. He was a wrestler. For the next 2 decades, he'd mention this McDonald's incident every so often, as if we both thought it was funny. In my developing sense of self, being fat and being spacey were 2 pieces of the same malady. They lived in the same emotional housing as Dad's blindness, my mother's neglect, and eventually my brother's schizophrenia. They were what made me. Chapter 3, Kitchen Tables. Dad's wake was on Thanksgiving Day. Several of my friends from 8th grade and their families came, and a few of my teachers. Jerry the big Swede brought us turkey dinners in styrofoam boxes, while the mourners filed through to view my father's body. Mum, Mike, and I ate our Thanksgiving meals in shifts in the back room of the funeral parlor, where only family was allowed. Mike turned 17 2 months later and started hanging out with the Burnouts, hosting nightly parties at our house while our mum was at work. I often sat outside on the concrete porch, the step, to inhale the chilly night air of my quiet street. The rarely used front entrance was flanked by overgrown evergreens, sheltering this little niche. Half a block away, where I had played kick the can just a few years earlier, the street light showed blurred clouds against a dark sky. Our porch light hadn't worked in years, but I'm sure all it needed was a bulb. The driveway was full of their beat-up, worked-over Camaros and Impalas. It felt good to be cold for a short while, out where nobody could see me. Inside, the air was thick and heavy. Some of these guys Mike had known all through school. Danny Hayes, Rocky Legato, Buddy Ayers, Stoner. They said even his mother called him that. Stoner was burly, his thick black hair in a ponytail, except for the few loose strands over his eyes, streaking his pale fat face. In summer he wore Levi's and a dirty tank top with a beer keg logo on the chest, the shirt too short to cover his white doughy stomach. In winter he topped the tank with a black leather jacket. Most of the guys would be gone before 11 at night when Mum got home. In later years they would stay, and she would allow it, happy, I think, for the company. Autumn nights seemed to be the most frigid. I hadn't adjusted to the change of seasons, never thought to bring a jacket with me. The closet was just inside the front door, but the only coat still hanging there was Dad's grey trench. A few months after his death, I had searched the pockets and found a box of chiclets. I put one piece on my tongue and held it a few seconds before chewing and eventually swallowing. I kept coming back for more, one at a time, until they were gone. At 14, I was the little sister, and most of my brother's friends protected me from their bad habits. In the brown panelled basement where Dad used to lie on the couch and watch the Cubs, where my brother had built his beer can collection in a pyramid on a ledge against the wall, Mike and his friends now moved the sewing machine aside to play quarters on an old dining table. Living with the heavy metal drama of teenage drunks made me feel cool, and as I tried to sleep for school the next morning, the sounds of their backyard retching floated into me through the white lace curtains. I thought of the stories I'd tell my friends. Often home alone as a teen, I'd spend whole summer days and weekends in bed reading, mostly romances from the library. Like lots of kids, I wasn't so keen on reading books required by English teachers. If the story was overly dramatic, though, especially concerning drug addiction or a tough guy's inability to read, I was in. Dad had been a reader too. On weekend afternoons, when the Cubs weren't playing, he would lie on the basement couch with a Harold Robbins paperback in his large, freckled hand, perched 2 inches from his face. The hand shaking a bit, he'd move the book as he scanned a sentence, placing each word directly in front of the sighted eye. The other eye was fake. He kept a spare in the top drawer of his dresser, behind the handkerchiefs, shoe polish, and tie clips, in a black velvety box. Every so often, when he was at work, I'd take the eye out to marvel at its solid brown iris and perfectly sized pupil. Once I brought Martha up to my parents' bedroom to see it. She said, "Weird," in a way that made me feel special. All this reading taught me how the English language works. The rise and fall of a story became familiar, as did the structure of grammar. I even came close to winning a sentence diagramming contest in 7th grade. In the championship round, it was just me and Dave Benevis. Dave Benevis and I. He was an unlikely candidate, a popular sporty guy who wasn't especially bookish. I'm pretty sure I wanted it more than he did, but in my final diagram, where spelling and punctuation counted, I used lowercase for each personal pronoun. Never before had I made that mistake. My brain had sputtered from some loose connection, a fear of success maybe. I'm still trying to figure it out, that disconnect between what I know and what I do. But my affinity to story in any form, TV, movies, books, jokes, gave me a voice. Normally I was shy, a slow thinker, unable to find the words when a teacher asked a question, fearful that I'd be called on. As a storyteller, I was that stutterer who loses the affliction only when singing. Even in grammar school, before the morning bell, a boy would approach me with a hopeful smirk. Do you have any new ones? If I did, if I'd heard something from my brother or listened in on my parents, the boy would gather his friends and we'd huddle in the corner away from Mrs. T, away from the classroom buzz, so I could tell dirty jokes, like the one about a woman who forgot to take off her pantyhose before sex. Every time the man went in, her toes curled up. In high school, I wore a rust-colored knit beret to school every day, and like some cartoon character, I'd approach strangers, even adults, the more formal looking the better, to ask, "Want to hear a joke?" I fed on their looks of surprise. 3 strings were walking down the street, I'd say, with a smile, then relay all 3 stages of the joke until animating with my fingers the punchline. "I'm afraid not." I knew that telling uninvited jokes to adult strangers was an odd habit, but I felt as if I were knocking some silly joy into their rule-driven worlds. In writing, too, I found a voice. For the school newspaper, I wrote a profile of one armed drummer who had come to give a motivational talk. He was late 20s, friendly. In the interview, I must not have impressed him with my professionalism, because when I later showed him the article, he didn't believe it was my work. "Come on," he needled, "you didn't do this on your own." I saw his reaction as a compliment to my writing, not an insult to my personality. This was the first of several times throughout my life when people were surprised that what was on the page came out of me. After the interview, the one-armed drummer asked me and my friend Dina, who'd been nearby, well, mostly he asked Dina, to go to a party with him. He was muscular, with scraggly dark hair in a ponytail, a black leather vest, and tattoos on his one arm. We were 17, but sure, I thought, why not? Dina was leery. She agreed, maybe only so I wouldn't go by myself. My friends were aware that I was boy crazy. I'd never had a proper boyfriend, which I attributed to being chubby, and consequently boys were all I thought about. I went to great lengths to meet them. That Friday night, Dina and I drove across the Indiana state line to the drummer's friend's apartment, an hour away. Nobody else knew we were doing this. We knocked on the apartment door, and some guy, maybe early 30s, answered. He wore colorful striped pants and an overcoat. "We're looking for Bob," I said. The place was dark and smoky, full of adults in weird clothes. There were derby hats. We found the drummer, who hadn't expected us to show up, in the next room. Now he didn't know what to do with us. "What is this?" I asked, motioning towards 3 TVs blaring at the weird, mesmerizing crowd. "It's Doctor Who," he said. We had crashed a gathering of nerdy fans wearing Doctor Who costumes. I'd been very lucky. One time I met a guy on the expressway. I was 18 and alone, driving back to Chicago after a visit with my grandmother in Minnesota. A young man waved from the driver's seat of a car in the next lane. I smiled. He pointed to the rest area sign. I pulled in. He ended up being a harmless teenager from a suburb near mine, but I had stopped at the rest area alone to meet a stranger. What the hell was I thinking? In high school, I was earning A's and B's, but did homework only in the hallway minutes before class, relying on friends to remind me of due dates and details. When you don't do the studying, when you don't listen to instruction, there's always an uncertainty circling your head. Even if you're a good test taker and can manage a decent grade, you've always a step behind the others. This disorientation was the underlay to everything I experienced in those days. Junior year, I tested into advanced placement history, billed as a college-style course, and needed my mom's permission to enroll. There was no discussion of the pros and cons, just a quick signature a day after the form was due. AP History is where I confirmed that I wasn't all that smart. Lengthy reading assignments every night just didn't interest me, and although I could read well, I didn't have the discipline to make myself do it. Besides, I had always gotten by without studying, gleaning the gist of things in class, and I was overconfident. Even after bombing the in-class test and Mr. Johnson's rather direct suggestion that I not waste $75 on the AP test for college credit, I was sure I could cram it all in. That is, the entire history of the United States within a few weeks remaining, and prove him wrong. Unfortunately, I failed to get the registration fee in on time, so we'll never know. The goal of each day back then was to get to my after-school activities, marching band, play practice, prop crew, newspaper. Often I'd stay until after dark without having planned a ride home. I'd either bum one from a kid in my neighborhood or, if that didn't pan out, try to get word to my mum, who was working the 3 to 11 shift as a nurse. The office, sometimes the school itself, was locked. The crowd waiting for rides outside the building would thin out as my options waned. I'd resort to asking acquaintances, who had already said they couldn't give me a ride, to call my mum when they got home, never sure if they would, or all the times I was stranded, somebody always rescued me. My friends' parents, my mom, my brother's friends. I never had to walk the dark 3 miles home. Positive reinforcement kept me moving forward without making plans. I learned that, in general, people will watch out for me. Once I started to drive, I was always running late for my shift at the movie theatre, so I often didn't leave time to stop for gas. 3 times within 1 year I ran out. The car sputtered to a roadside near the same spot each time. 3 times the same guy helped me. I was mildly embarrassed because he was a boy I'd known all through school, and he was cute. But mostly I thought this space cadet persona, this impulsive, silly side of me, was funny. Later I'd tell my friends, "It happened again. And guess who was there? Again." At first I didn't mind my brother's parties. The burnouts were fun, and my friends and I laughed through our crushes on some of the guys. But as these boys became men, they got involved in more serious drug issues, sticking tongues out to show squares of acid, and while I read books in my bedrooms, they snorted cocaine in the bathroom next door, leaving a mirror with streaks of dust and a razor blade on the back of the toilet. In the middle of the night, strangers pounded on the front door. Guys passed out in the basement. They stayed for days, kicked out of their own homes. My mother's ring went missing. Towards the end of high school, I could go a full week without speaking to Mom. It wasn't deliberate. In those days, nothing was deliberate. She worked a lot, and she had a boyfriend who had been hanging around our house. The first time I met him was in the kitchen. I was making a sandwich after school, thinking I was the only one home because I knew Mom had just started her shift and my brother's car wasn't in the driveway. When the boyfriend walked out of Mum's bedroom, I was startled, creeped out. I knew who he was, but he hadn't been introduced. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "My mum isn't home." It wasn't like me to make waves. He laughed and said not to worry, he was leaving soon. A few weeks later he moved in. His name was Ed, and he was an alcoholic. I began spending more time at friends' houses. Martha across the street lived with her mum and dad, 3 sisters, her brother Buddy, who was Mike's best friend, Uncle John, and 2 grandparents. There was always somebody in Martha's kitchen. I'd come over after school and wait while she did homework at the kitchen table. I tried not to be a bother. Martha's mum making dinner and her dad sitting at the other end of the table making lists. They went grocery shopping, big shopping, every Friday night. On Saturdays, Mrs. Ayres would make one of her specialties, lasagna or spaghetti sauce, that would simmer all day and send unbelievable smells throughout the house. Sometimes Martha would ask if I could eat over, and if they had a place at the table that night, Mrs. Ayres would say yes. Supper was always at 5:30, and it always included a salad with creamy garlic dressing. And when you asked for more milk, Martha's mum poured some out of her glass into yours. After the meal, Martha and her much older sisters sang while they did dishes. I sat at the table waiting, wondering how they knew so much about harmony. Some summers I joined Martha to visit her relatives in Maine. Aunt Eileen cooked and cleaned for us at their woodsy camp on holiday. She washed our clothes by hand, hung them to dry, prepared every meal in the small cabin kitchen, and cleaned up afterwards while we laughed and swam in the lake. I marveled at the way she mothered us, putting her feet up by the fire only after the sun set. Down my street, at Dina's house, Mrs. Legrand gave us girls lemonade in mason jar mugs with ribbon trim. We sat in her kitchen and drank it down. Their table was always clean, a pretty piece of fabric running across the middle, under an oak napkin holder, and cute duckling salt and pepper shakers. Right. My kitchen table at home was mounded with junk, rolled up newspapers and empty beer cans with ashes at the broken tabs, crumbs stuck to the table's wood grain formica. When we wanted to sit there, we'd first have to clear a space, pushing the junk towards the other side, sometimes forcing it off the opposite edge, then search for a wash rag to wipe a circle in front of one chair. Ever since then, I've admired women like Martha's mum and aunt, Mrs. Legrand, with her mason jars, women who really pay attention to the details of a home and do the work to make everyone else comfortable. Yes, these are mostly women. Men can and do make effective homemakers. Bruce, now that he is retired, cleans way more than I do, and one of the men in our group of friends prepares a beautiful dinner party, pampering his guests from drinks to dessert, but most often it's a feminine touch, the maternal impulse that makes a place feel like a home.